we are at the 150th anniversary of the farm. Starting the B-men over here. Karen Worthington and Bernadette and Bernie. And then we've over here, Chris and Audrey have done a great job. There's Rachel and Eddie. And Jules is here. Haven't said hello to Jules yet. Nani Sissy's here. I've got to meet you. Hello. Nice to meet you, Miley. Hey, Jules. How are you, Jules? Nice to meet you. I'm Kathy.
Miley.
There's Mick. And what's your name, darling?
Bella.
Bella. Is
Isabella.
it Bella? That's right. The beautiful Isabella.
You too.
Nice to see you. And is this Jack, is it?
Yeah.
Is this Jack? Got to get Jack's face in it. It's Wendy Buckley and Chris and Mary. Looking at all the history that Chris and Audrey put together with the help of a few other people, Leo and Anne. Sure. Oh, it's Damien. Haven't seen Damien yet. Darcy, Millie, Peter Doyle, Uncle Peter, Richard, Auntie Kay, Neil and Pat McClafferty. There's Sam, there's Joyce. There's Mum, Daddy Brenda and Richard. Rachel. So many.
We're going to go through. Now, before I go into the McLean history, thank you everyone for coming. People have come a long way, I realise, and there's extended family, there's neighbours, there's good friends, there's people who worked on the dairy for a long time. Greg Mullenhagen's turned up today, and he was one of the chief milkers for 30 years. There's extended branches here, and thank you for coming and filling in some gaps too. Some of the Buckley family here, Mary and Wendy, thank you for coming. So, in terms of what we're going to do, I'll talk about the McLean history. There is some dairy implements, and Mark Flynn is around. Mark used to work in the Bethesda milk factory, and he worked in the Paul's milk factory. So some of the things that we've got from the farm or other dairy farms, like the separator here, there's a hand separator at the back, there's a butter churn, and all those things. Mark will give a quick explanation at the end of my talk, how milk's processed, because that was what paid the bills here for not quite 150 years, but until, the early 90s, 93 or so. All right. So McLean, we're the Flynns of McLean, but as you'll hear, really the Flynns are Johnny-come-latelys. We come here in the 1930s, but and there'll be a test after this, particularly the kids. You'll see, it'll be an easy way to remember it because all the street names around here are the ancestors. So I'll ask the kids if anyone knows the street, and then you'll work out the ancestor. But the names changed because most of them had one girl, so they had to marry a boy, so the names changed, or there were early deaths. And so that's why it went from Buckleys, Coonans, Ginthers, Flynns, over 150 years. And it's 150 years this year. You'll see, I think behind the drinks there's a copy of the sales in 1872. And it's before I start, you realise it's a relatively unusual thing. Like there's Mick over there rousing his grandkids, but those grandkids are 8th generation. There's Jack and Isabel, I think. They're 8th generation. They live over in the Evergreen estate, and you'll hear that's the name of the dairy. So there's eight generations still here, and hopefully more to come. So it's an unusual thing, and I think it's unusual because of these smaller families and one lady, as I said, and to be honest, the land wasn't great, so no one was coming in offering us lots of money. I think that was part of it as well. That people just made a living, and they made a living and just enough to get by. But you'll see things changed when I get into it with a Danish guy. So someone from outside came in and sort of changed the way things were done. And we changed from dairying a little bit. So Maclean history, we're mostly the Maclean area. And if you look at some of the maps, the Coonans and the Flynns, the Ginthers, they covered the Maclean area right up to including the bridge and across the creek. So we've got a neighbour across the creek, and Granny used to say, I hope they're not haunted by the Coonans, because all their graves are literally directly across from the dairy. There's a lot of, all in Glen Eagle, of course, you'll see a lot of these people as well, the cemetery there. The name Maclean, there's some conjecture it came from an administrator that was doing the surveying around that time, but there was also a separate politician who came around the time the bridge was built in the 1870s, and his name was Maclean as well. So, before the Maclean got its name, though, for thousands of years it was the Ugambe Aboriginal group. And because of the glare, you may not see much of this, but I'll explain it. You may not see that pointer either, but this is, Moreton Island and Strady over here. Down here's the Gold Coast. Scenic Rim. All this area near the border area is the Ugambe tribe, the Juggera tribe here. And they were here for thousands of years. And interestingly, I hadn't realised some of the words that we still use today come from these tribes. Like the word for work is yakka in the Aboriginal language, and that's where hard yakka comes from. So that was the Juggera tribe. There was a man called Bilin. He was a local leader, and his daughter lived in Beaudesert. And once the railway came through in the late 1800s, 1889 or so, which changed things again for Maclean, he got free access to that, and he visited his daughter in Beaudesert. But he lived to 80. He was born in 1820, died in just after 1900. So Bilin, also known as Jackie and John Logan. There are some photos of him too, if you can't see it because of the glare. About 1823, when Oxley was sent up to look for a new penal colony, Sydney was getting full of convicts, and people who were playing up there, they wanted to send them somewhere else, so they sent Oxley up in 1823, picked this spot, Moreton area, and then not that long afterwards, they sent this guy. I'm going to ask the kids, who's old enough to have done their history? Where's Sam? Yeah. No? Anyone? The adults should know. I'm going to pick Connor. Where's that guy? That was the button you had too long. Anyone else want to go? Yeah, Logan. So the area is named after this man, Captain Patrick Logan. He came from Scotland. He came here in his 30s. He was known to be brutal. Someone reminded me 150 lashes was a beer. He was famous for giving 150 lashes, but he was a skilled administrator. He built that mill at the top of Wickham Terrace. It still stands today. It got convicts grinding down grain. There was about 200 convicts at the time he turned. There was 1,000 by the time he left, about 4 years later. And he's an extraordinary... So he was apparently a very unpleasant person, but he was an extraordinary explorer as well. And about coming around 1827, if you go, just go forwards, you can see these. This is a plaque at Tully Park. If you have a look at that, it tells you the story. But he was the first man to cross, first white man, and he then made an attempt on Mount Barney and couldn't make it up to the top. But in the meantime, he just crossed just there. So he crossed the Coonan land, as it turned out. There were some Aboriginal settlements there at the time. So it's 1827. He tried again the following year. He was a pretty obstinate person. And with Cunningham of Cunningham's Gap and Fraser, he was the only one that could make it to the top. So he was the first white man to climb Mount Barney, and even to this day is Mark Flynn. Where's Mark? Mark Flynn can attest to you. Mark grew up in the shadows. Apart from growing up here, he also grew up in the shadows of Mount Barney and Bedabara. Mark, he spent a night on Mount Barney because it's a very difficult mountain. It's easy to get lost.
He's the first white man that lost on it.
I think Mark is the first Flynn to spend a night on Mount Barney. So that was 1828. So not long after that, Cop and Co starts coming through. Maclean's was a central point. So now it's a piddly little, people drive past it and they say, oh, there's the Maclean's Bridge. But it was a designated town. There was lots of little allotments. There was a Cop and Co staging point. There was a pub there, and the pub's connected to our family, and you'll see a photo soon. It was an important place because they changed horses. It was people going down to New South Wales, onto Warwick, through to Bethesda. So there was a staging post on both sides actually there was a pub, but on the northern side where Tully Park is, there was a pub. And again, a lot of that's Coonan land, and so it's no surprise that one of our ancestors ran that pub. So that's a photo, if you can see, just showing the Cop and Co, and it stopped at Maclean. And that's a timetable for the Cop and Co, stopping on its trip a couple of times a week. It went to Warwick. So around this time, that's 1876. If you can't see it on this one, there's a photo of the same slide of the bridge over the Logan. It's the first bridge to be put over the Logan. It's an extraordinary engineering feat because it was so important to farmers in the community. So it was the first bridge transversed over the Logan. It got washed away as happens. And that's, again, you'll see a photo along there, the same photo. This is the Jimboomba homestead areas, the Jimboomba rail yards, everything was being pulled by bullocks. So this is maybe the pop quiz for the Flynn kids to learn the history. This is the way that it's confusing, and going to these things you think, oh, who are those names and so forth, but just the local areas full of these names. So the names of the ancestors are the names of the roads. So I'll talk about all these, but Timothy Buckley, Jeremiah Coonan, Honora Coonan, we've got Joanna Coonan, Kathleen Flynn, of course, and Mari Dorr. So we'll talk about these, but we're going to say name that road. Now you can't see that map, but again it's up the back. It's up right at the back left, and it's got who owned the blocks in the early 1900s. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Rachel. I was taught this as a medical student. You pick people who are trying to hide. They're the ones that choose. I'm joking, Rachel. What street does Uncle Peter live? Buckley Road. Okay, so Buckley Road. So Buckley Road, for those who don't know it, like you, Buckley Road is just around the corner here. If you go down Neville Road, you come on and just keep going along. It's Buckley Road. And Mary Buckley's here today, and Wendy. Mary, yeah. So we've got still the Buckley names. There's a lot of Buckleys, and Mary's and Wendy have been kind to fill me in with some of that today. So Buckley Road's around the corner. That's where Uncle Peter lives. That was a map of that. That photo's up there too. Mark and I think, I've been trying to ask Mary whether there's any other photos of Timothy Buckley. He died in 1909. He was almost 80. Well, he was 80. He was born in 1830 in Cork. So he would have had the Coors. He would have had an accent like we've got here, Anne, Cor and Malachi. If you listen to them talk, that's probably the way Timothy Buckley talked. Because he came here in his 40s. He left Ireland in his 30s. His father spent a year in jail for sheep stealing, so they thought. As it turned out, he didn't do it. When Timothy Buckley was 7, he got acquitted, but that might have been an instrumental thing. Life was pretty tough at that time. But in his 30s, he left. He'd already had his first daughter by then, Joanna, who ran the pub. Joanna was one that ran the pub. So she was from Ireland as well. And Timothy came over here and he's worked the Gympie goldfields, we think. And Mary and I thought about this too. You're thinking, how do these people pay for this selection? So he didn't buy it off anyone. He just applied for the selection of this property here. It was almost 700 acres at the time, and they added to it and subtracted at times. We thought, how did he pay for it? But probably he might have found some gold in the Gympie land, the Gympie mine. That's what we think. Because how is this relatively poor guy coming from Cork going to pay for something like this? But it wasn't that well, I say it wasn't expensive. You'll see the prices, or I'll come to them. would have been expensive in the time. So that's Timothy Buckley. There's an obituary of him in that blue folder if people want to see a little bit more about him. And we think that that's him. Mark and I think it's this guy here sitting down, because we think that's the old Flynn dairy and taken before 1909. And we've got a lot of other photos a lot earlier. Marky showed me a photo the last couple of days from 1885 of this man's daughter. So, you know, a photo that's survived somehow for 137 years. And that's farmers, they don't throw things away.